The parcel arrived while Augusta Whitcomb was giving her daughter away. There had been no proposal, no private understanding, and no word from Nora. Yet before 30 women in the dining room of the Marietta house, Augusta lifted her lemonade glass and announced that her only daughter would soon become Mrs. Theodore Vale. For one suspended moment, Nora heard nothing but the paper fans moving around the long table. Then the ladies of the Improvement League began to applaud. Theodore Vale, who was seated beside Augusta, lowered his silver head with the solemn satisfaction of a man accepting property already inspected and found sound. Nora was still holding the cake knife when a hotel boy entered with a long parcel wrapped in rain-spotted brown paper. It bore her name in a trembling hand. Inside lay a blue silk parasol, blackened by fire. The silk had burned away along one side. 2 ribs were twisted. The ivory ferrule had melted into a shape like a tear. Yet the ashwood handle was intact, and near its curve, someone had carved a small wren with one lifted wing. Augusta dropped her glass. She did not ask where the parcel had come from. She did not examine the bird. She looked at the ruined parasol as if a dead woman had entered the room and taken the empty chair beside her. Then she told Nora to throw it into the stove. Nora was 34 years old. She had repaired storm-torn umbrellas, balanced the accounts of Whitcomb's fine notions, nursed her father through the winter of his death, and spent 11 years hearing that a daughter with good sense did not embarrass her mother. Until that afternoon, she had obeyed often enough to be mistaken for a woman without wishes. But she did not burn the parasol. She wrapped it again, carried it home beneath her arm, and for the first time in her life let her mother walk ahead without hurrying to catch up. Marietta stood where the Muskingum entered the Ohio, a town of brick houses, steamboat whistles, church bells, and muddy hems. In the spring of 1904, the river had already climbed twice over the lower wharf. Men in the hardware stores discussed the watermarks on warehouse walls, while women on Front Street discussed one another. By the morning after the luncheon, everyone knew of Nora's engagement. Customers came into Whitcomb's fine notions with congratulations prepared. They bought hooks, ribbon, mourning pins, hat elastic, and the small imported buttons Augusta kept beneath glass. Each woman found a reason to look into the rear workroom, where Nora sat beneath the north window with the burned parasol across her knees. Nora answered every blessing with the same careful words. She said that her mother had spoken too soon. The sentence traveled faster than the engagement had. At noon, Augusta shut the door between the shop and the workroom. She was 61, straight-backed, handsome, and always dressed as if a photographer might arrive. Widowhood had put black silk on her body, but had not softened her face. Her grey hair was arranged in exact rolls above her ears, and a jet pin held her collar so tightly that Nora sometimes wondered how her mother swallowed. Augusta said Theodore had offered security, respectability, and a home on 5th Street. At 48, he was a widower, vice president of the Washington County Savings Association, and a vestryman at St. Luke's. His daughter, June, needed a woman's guidance. Whitcomb's needed a dependable arrangement with the bank. Nora, her mother added, needed a future. Nora asked whether a future could be arranged without the knowledge of the person expected to live in it. Augusta's eyes rested on the parasol. The burned silk seemed to offend her more deeply than the question. She said that gratitude was not captivity. She had given Nora 34 years of protection from mistakes, gossip, poverty, and unsuitable men. All she asked in return was that Nora not ruin the family over a childish hunger for romance. There was no romance in Nora's life, childish or otherwise. That was part of Augusta's strength. She could accuse her daughter of endangering something Nora had never possessed.
Nora had not been courted since she was 22. By then, Harlan Whitcomb's health had begun to fail, and Augusta had explained that the store could not spare her. Suitors had stopped appearing.
Nora had worked behind the counter, then at the repair table, while the seasons announced themselves through merchandise. White gloves at Easter, paper fans in June, school ribbons in September, black crepe whenever death crossed town. She had become known for saving objects other people considered beyond repair. Umbrellas arrived with snapped stretchers and rusted runners. Parasols came with lace torn by carriage wheels, silk bleached by summers, handles chewed by anxious dogs. Nora cleaned the frames with lamp oil, matched thread by daylight, and cut patches so carefully that the damage became visible only to someone who knew where to look. It was not an art Augusta praised. Repairs brought pennies. New parasols brought dollars. But women who could not afford new ones returned to Nora. Factory girls from Harmar crossed the bridge with umbrellas wrapped in newspaper. Widows brought the last good things their husbands had bought them. School children appeared after storms, ashamed of bent ribs and frightened of punishment at home. Nora repaired some for half price, and some for nothing. She kept no list. Theodore Vale had once watched her replace a spring in June's school umbrella. He had said her patience would make her an excellent stepmother. He had not asked whether patience was all she wished to be valued for. Now Nora placed the ruined blue parasol on the table and asked her mother who had sent it. Augusta said she did not know. Nora turned the handle until the carved wren faced upward. Her mother's gaze followed it. That was enough. Nora remembered almost nothing from the night of the old Bell River Hotel fire. She had been 4. The hotel had stood near the river before the flood of 1884 damaged what the fire had spared. In Nora's memory, there was only blue above her face, smoke pressing low, and a woman's voice repeating the name of a bird. Wren. It had been Nora's first clear word after the fire. Augusta had always said the shock had confused her. When Nora touched the carved wing, the old memory moved like warmth beneath a locked door. Augusta told her again to destroy the parasol. Nora said she intended to repair it. Her mother's mouth tightened. She said no respectable craftsperson in Marietta would touch such rubbish. That afternoon, Nora learned she was almost right. The first umbrella maker refused after seeing the bird. Mr. Enderley, who sold walking sticks and leather goods near Putnam Street, examined the broken ribs with professional interest. Then he turned the handle, found the carving, and laid the parasol down as if it had become unclean. He said the mark belonged to Amos Doran, though Amos had been dead nearly 20 years. The Doran workshop had stood in Harmar before the fire. Amos carved a wren on every handle he shaped for someone he loved. It was a foolish custom, Enderley said, because affection was not a maker's mark and should not be confused with one. Nora asked who repaired Doran work now. Enderley looked toward his doorway before answering. Amos's son had returned to town 3 years earlier. Silas Doran made canes, tool handles, and furniture spindles in a narrow shop behind the old foundry. He did good work. That admission seemed to cost Enderley something. Then he warned Nora that good hands did not guarantee good blood. The sentence had the polished surface of an old-town judgment, handled so often that no one remembered who had first spoken it. Nora carried the parasol across the bridge. Harmar did not pretend mud belonged only to poor people, as Front Street sometimes did. Its yards held wash lines, chicken coops, broken wagons, and children with honest dirt on their knees. The air smelled of river water, coal smoke, hot iron, and bread from a German bakery. Silas Doran's shop stood behind a row of workers' cottages. There was no sign, only curls of pale wood gathered beneath the door. Nora expected an old man. Instead, she found someone perhaps 4 years older than herself, tall, without elegance, with a brown apron and a narrow scar running from his left temple into his hair. His sleeves were rolled above strong forearms, dusted with ash wood. He was fitting a new handle to a bricklayer's trowel and did not look up until Nora set the parcel on his bench. When he saw the parasol, the chisel slipped from his hand. He knew it. Not merely the carving, the whole ruined thing. Silas opened the frame with care. The damaged silk gave a tired crackle. He examined the melted ferrule, the blackened tips, and a narrow repair near the lower seam, where 7 faded green stitches crossed the blue cloth. His mother had made those stitches. Maeve Doran, he explained, repaired umbrellas in his father's shop. She had sewn every patch with 7 buttonhole stitches because 7 was the number of days a thing had to survive before it could call itself mended. The odd belief might have sounded quaint in another man's mouth. Silas said it without smiling. Nora asked whether the parasol had belonged to Maeve. He said no. It had belonged to Augusta Whitcomb. The room seemed to change size. Silas knew Augusta's initials had once been set into a small silver collar below the handle. The collar was gone, but a lighter ring in the wood showed where it had rested. His father had made the parasol for Augusta in 1877, when blue silk from Philadelphia was still rare enough in Marietta to bring women to a shop window. The last time Silas saw it, his mother was carrying Nora out of the burning hotel. Nora lowered herself onto a 3-legged stool. Silas did not offer comfort. His face held the stillness of a man who had imagined this meeting too many times, and discovered imagination had not prepared him. He had been 8 that summer. His father had sent him to deliver a repaired cane to the Bell River Hotel. Maeve was there, fitting new curtains in the upstairs dining room. Augusta and 4-year-old Nora had come for a family supper. Nora Whitcomb was meeting hotel proprietor Orson Vale about an investment. Just after 9, fire broke out in a private sitting room. Smoke filled the upper passage before anyone below understood what was happening. Silas remembered glass breaking and the woman screaming that her child was upstairs. Maeve ran back. She came out with Nora beneath the opened parasol, using the wet silk to shield the child from sparks. The blue canopy was burning at one edge. Maeve's sleeves were on fire. Men beat the flames out with their coats. By morning, Augusta's emerald brooch was missing. So was a packet of hotel money. Orson Vale told the constable he had seen Maeve near the office before the fire. Nora Whitcomb said nothing to defend her. Maeve was arrested while the burns on her hands were still bandaged. No money and no brooch were found. The charge was later dismissed, but Marietta had already delivered its verdict. Amos lost customers. Their landlord ended the lease. Someone painted "Thief" across the workshop door. Within a year, the Dorans left for Pittsburgh. Amos died there after a lathe injury. Maeve took in sewing until her eyesight failed. She died when Silas was 19, still refusing to speak of the fire. Nora listened with both hands closed around the charred handle. All her life, Augusta had described Maeve Doran as a servant who panicked and carried Nora into danger instead of away from it. She had never said Maeve saved her. She had never mentioned an arrest. Silas asked who sent the parasol. Nora admitted she did not know. The hotel boy had received it from a colored woman in a gray bonnet, too old to climb the dining room stairs. She had left before anyone asked her name. At this, Silas finally looked directly at Nora. He said it might have been Cora Bell. Cora had worked in the Bell River Hotel laundry. She was the last living person, apart from Augusta and Orson Vale's children, known to have been upstairs that night.
After the fire, she moved to Parkersburg and became a midwife. Silas had written to her twice. Both letters had been returned. Nora heard the hurt inside that small fact. 2 letters, 2 journeys ending where they began. She asked him to restore the frame. He refused. The refusal was quiet, almost gentle. The parasol had already cost his family enough. He did not want it open above his workbench or carried through town as a curiosity. He wanted no part in whatever private battle had begun between Nora and Augusta. Nora said it was not private if a whole town had helped punish an innocent woman. Silas answered that towns were skilled at calling cruelty public duty. They were less skilled at apology. She left the shop with the parasol still broken. Rain began as she reached the bridge. Nora had repaired hundreds of umbrellas, but the only one she carried that day could not protect her. She walked home beneath the cold rain, holding the burned blue silk against her breast, while congratulations followed her from every awning. Theodore Vale came to call at 7. Augusta had changed into her best black bodice and lit both gas brackets in the parlor. A silver tea service waited on the walnut table. Nora entered, still damp at the shoulders, and saw that her mother had arranged the room for consent. Theodore stood when she appeared. His beard was clipped into 2 neat silver points, and his waistcoat carried a watch chain heavy enough to suggest permanence. He apologized for the luncheon announcement, though his apology blamed Augusta's enthusiasm rather than his own participation. He then made the proposal his family considered proper. He said, affection often followed sound judgment. June admired Nora. His house needed warmth. Nora's mother deserved relief from financial uncertainty. The bank held the note on Whitcomb's shop building, and Theodore believed family matters could always be managed with more patience than business matters. It was a threat dressed for church. Nora asked whether the bank intended to call the note. Theodore smiled. He said not while he could influence the board. Augusta poured tea, though no one had asked for it. Her hand shook once against the cup, a small betrayal she covered by moving the sugar bowl. Nora understood then that the engagement announcement was not merely a mother's ambition. The store was in danger. Harlan had borrowed against the building during his last illness. Since his death, Augusta had paid interest but little principal. 2 poor Christmas seasons and repairs after the previous spring's flood had done the rest. Theodore knew the exact weakness of the Whitcomb women because his bank had measured it. Nora asked why her mother had hidden the debt. Augusta replied that daughters who were protected from burdens should not complain when protection required decisions. Theodore moved closer. He said Nora would keep the shop if she wished, though there would be no need for her to sit repairing common umbrellas. June would benefit from her example. In time, perhaps, God might bless them with another child. Nora thought of June Vale, a pale 12-year-old who apologized whenever she entered a room. She thought of the shop, her father's note, her mother's shaking hand, and the ruined parasol upstairs. Then she looked at Theodore. She did not dislike his face. Dislike would have made refusal easier. His face was merely certain. He had gone through life believing a woman's fear and a woman's agreement were 2 forms of the same useful silence. Nora told him she would give an answer in 1 month. Augusta objected. Theodore did not. A man confident of ownership could afford 30 days. Before leaving, he noticed a thread of blue silk clinging to Nora's skirt. His expression changed. He asked whether the parcel at the hotel had contained an old parasol. Nora said it had. Theodore warned her that the Doran story had injured both families once. His father had died with the bitterness of false accusations still upon him. Stirring ashes, he said, blackened only the living. Nora asked how he knew about the carved wren. Theodore's hand stopped on the brim of his hat. She had not mentioned it. For the second time that day, silence answered more honestly than a respectable person did. After he left, Augusta locked the front door. Then she turned and struck Nora across the face. It was not a hard blow. That made it worse. It was measured, delivered with the same precision Augusta used when trimming a hat. She said Nora would not drag the Whitcomb name through the mud for the sake of Maeve Doran's son. Nora tasted blood where her tooth had cut her lip. She asked what Holland had done on the night of the fire. Her mother's face emptied. For one instant, Nora saw not the ruler of the shop, not the widow in jet and black silk, but a frightened young woman standing in smoke. Then Augusta ordered her upstairs. Nora went, because long obedience does not disappear at the first act of courage. But she carried the blue parasol with her, and she locked her bedroom door. The next morning, Augusta behaved as if nothing had happened. She placed oatmeal on the table, corrected the grocer's bill, and reminded Nora that the new shipment of hat pins would arrive at 10. The refusal to acknowledge the blow was another kind of authority. It demanded that Nora doubt the evidence of her own swollen lip. Nora did not give her mother the satisfaction. She ate in silence. Before leaving the kitchen, she said she would go to Parkersburg on Wednesday to look for Cora Bell. Augusta's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She claimed Cora was dead. Nora asked how she knew. Augusta rose so quickly that the table shook. She said Cora had lied at the original inquiry, that Maeve had lied, and that poor Harlan had spent the rest of his life paying for other people's malice. Then she swept the breakfast dishes into the basin, breaking a saucer. It was the first time Nora had heard her mother say there had been an inquiry. At the shop, Theodore's daughter was waiting beneath the striped awning. June Vale wore a brown school coat, despite the warm morning. She had Theodore's narrow face, but none of his certainty. One of the ribs of her umbrella had torn through the black cotton, and she held it behind her as if hiding an injured animal. June said her father had told the maid to throw it away. It had belonged to her mother, and she wanted Nora to mend it before he noticed. The late Mrs. Vale had died of pneumonia 5 years earlier. In town, she was remembered as delicate and lovely, which were the words people often used when a dead woman had been unhappy, and no one wished to ask why. Nora took the umbrella to the rear table. June followed. She watched Nora remove the cap, release the wire, and ease the broken rib from its pocket. Her attention was so complete that Nora handed her the pliers and showed her how to hold the stretcher steady. The girl's fingers trembled at first, then they steadied. From the front of the shop, Augusta called that young ladies did not belong among tools. June immediately put the pliers down. Nora placed them back in her hand. They worked until the bell above the front door rang. Theodore entered without greeting his daughter. He examined Nora's bruised mouth, then looked toward Augusta, and in that brief exchange, Nora understood that her mother had already given him an explanation. Theodore told June to wait in the carriage. When the girl had gone, he laid a cream envelope on the counter. It was an invitation proof for a reception at the Vale House, dated 3 weeks away. Beneath Theodore's name and Nora's, the printer had left a blank space for the announcement of their wedding day. He called it a practical precaution. Nora pushed the proof back. Theodore's tone remained courteous. He reminded her that uncertainty encouraged gossip. The bank's directors were conservative men. They valued stable households, especially when evaluating renewals for businesses conducted by women. Augusta said Nora understood. Nora looked at the two of them, standing on opposite sides of the glass counter, like partners in a transaction. Then she said she understood perfectly. She completed June's umbrella before noon and charged nothing. Inside the hem, where only someone opening the canopy would see it, she made 7 green stitches. She did not know whether the act honored Maeve Doran
or borrowed courage from her. She knew only that the damaged thing looked stronger for having been visibly mended. Nora took the interurban car to Parkersburg on Wednesday. The conductor knew Augusta and asked whether she was shopping for wedding linens. Nora said she was looking for a midwife. By the time the car crossed the river, the conductor's curiosity had become almost painful. But Nora gave him nothing more. The address Silas had used for Cora Bell led to a narrow house on Avery Street, with blue bottles arranged along the window ledge. An elderly white woman answered and said Cora had left 2 years earlier after a disagreement with the landlord. She did not know where Cora lived now. She knew only that babies still arrived when they wished, and someone always seemed able to find Mrs. Bell. Nora went to 3 churches, a pharmacy, and the county infirmary. At each place, people recognized Cora's name. No one offered an address. At the 4th, an African Methodist Episcopal church near the edge of town, the pastor listened without interrupting. Then he asked why a daughter of Augusta Whitcomb wanted a woman her family had once called a liar. Nora said she wanted the truth. The pastor replied that truth was not an errand a comfortable person completed in an afternoon. He asked what Nora intended to risk for it. She had no answer. He gave no address, but he told her Cora was alive. Before Nora left, he added that Cora had delivered more than 800 children and buried 2 of her own. A woman who had survived that much did not owe testimony to every stranger who arrived carrying an old family name. On the return journey, Nora watched the Ohio flatten the evening light into dull silver. She had gone to Parkersburg expecting the truth to be waiting like a parcel at a counter. Instead, she returned with wet shoes and a question. What did she intend to risk? The store, her home, her mother's approval, Theodore's protection. These seemed enormous until she considered what Maeve Doran had lost, while Nora's family kept its place at church. At the Marietta stop, Silas was standing beside a wagon loaded with chair legs. He saw her before she could decide whether to speak. His eyes dropped to her muddy shoes, then to the Parkersburg timetable in her hand. Nora told him Cora was alive. Silas closed his eyes briefly. For a man who showed little, relief transformed him. It loosened his mouth and lowered his shoulders. Nora realized he had carried the possibility of Cora's death every day since his letters were returned. She also told him Cora did not wish to be found. He said that was her right. There was no bitterness in the answer, which made Nora ashamed of how easily she had expected access to another woman's pain. Silas helped her into the wagon. The seat was narrow, and the evening traffic forced them close as they crossed the bridge. He smelled of cedar shavings and river wind. For several blocks, neither spoke. Then Nora asked why he had returned to a town that had marked his mother a thief. He explained that Pittsburgh held too many rooms in which his family had been unhappy. After Maeve died, he spent years moving from one workshop to another, Erie, Akron, Columbus, learning machines, earning wages, and keeping no object he could not fit in a trunk. Marietta was the only place where he remembered his mother laughing. The memory came from before the fire. She had laughed in the workshop when a customer's parrot bit Amos through his glove. One good memory had been enough to bring him back. Nora thought of her own childhood in the rooms above Whitcomb's. She remembered her father coughing behind a closed door, Augusta counting receipts by lamplight, and herself learning to step around every silence. She searched for a memory of her mother laughing. There was one. Nora had been 6, perhaps 7. A summer storm had turned all the umbrellas inside out as church emptied. Augusta had stood beneath the awning with wet hair against her cheeks and laughed until she could not breathe. Harlan had looked embarrassed. Nora had looked astonished. She had spent 27 years waiting to hear that laugh again. Silas stopped the wagon outside Whitcomb's, but did not help her down immediately. He said he would repair the blue parasol's frame if Nora still wished it. He had changed his mind because she crossed the river to find Cora. Nora told him the pastor had sent her home with nothing. Silas said going and returning with nothing were sometimes different from never going at all. She brought him the parasol before the shop opened the next morning. Restoration began with taking the ruined thing apart. Silas showed Nora how the runner had warped from heat and how the steel ribs had pulled against the ash shaft. One rib was original, hand-forged and light. Another had been replaced years later with a cheap stamped piece. A third carried a dark deposit that Silas first mistook for rust. He worked behind a magnifying lens, scraping gently with a bone tool. The deposit was hardened wax. Someone had dripped candle wax along the rib and pressed the silk over it, sealing a narrow space between cloth and steel.
Silas warmed the area above a spirit lamp. The wax softened. Nora lifted the 7 green stitches one by one. Inside the seam lay a small iron key. It was less than 2 inches long, black with age, its bow shaped like a clover. Silas did not touch it. He said hotel maids once carried keys like that for linen closets and service stairs. Nora remembered the parcel's anonymous sender. Cora Bell had worked in the laundry. The discovery did not solve anything. It widened the mystery. Why had Cora hidden the key inside Augusta's parasol? Why had she kept the parasol for 27 years? Why send it now, on the day of Nora's false engagement? Silas laid the key in a shallow wooden tray. Nora watched his hands. A craftsman's hands were often praised as strong, but his were precise before they were strong.
He could bend wire without marking it, and test wood grain with the pad of one finger. On the back of his right hand ran a white scar shaped like a river branch. He noticed her looking and said a draw knife had slipped when he was 15. Nora showed him the smooth mark beside her thumb, where an umbrella spring had pierced her hand. It was a small exchange, scar for scar. No promise came with it. Yet Nora felt more recognized in that moment than she had during Theodore's entire proposal. For the next 2 weeks, she went to Silas's shop in the hour before Whitcomb's opened. They did not hide exactly. Harmar saw them. Children peered through the window. The baker's wife began greeting Nora with unusual warmth. But Front Street did not wake early enough to witness her crossing the bridge. Silas straightened the surviving ribs and forged replacements at a blacksmith's hearth. Nora removed the blue silk, panel by panel, preserving every usable piece. They decided not to make the parasol look new. A perfect restoration would erase what had happened. The burn belonged to its history. Nora found silk in the Whitcomb storeroom that matched the original blue only when held in shadow. In sunlight it was slightly brighter. She cut the new sections so the old and new alternated around the canopy. Silas carved a replacement ferrule from bone. He refused ivory, saying no animal should die merely to disguise old fire. Some mornings they spoke little. On others, conversation moved between them with the ease of tools passed across a bench. Nora learned that Silas lived in 2 rented rooms above the German bakery. He drank coffee too strong for most people and kept a cracked sugar bowl because it had belonged to Maeve. He had never married. There had been a woman in Erie, but her brothers would not permit her to marry the son of an accused thief. After she yielded to them, Silas stopped asking anyone to choose him at such a cost. He said it without seeking pity. Nora told him about a schoolmaster who had once waited for her after choir practice. Augusta had said the family needed Nora at home. 3 months later, the schoolmaster married a girl in Zanesville. For years, Nora blamed him for not waiting longer. Only recently had she wondered why she believed he alone was responsible for saving her. Silas asked what she would do if Theodore called the loan. Nora said she did not know. It was the most honest answer she had given a man, and he did not rush to fill it with advice. By the 12th morning, the Parasol could open again. Silas pressed the catch. The canopy rose slowly, alternating faded and new blue, crossed by one blackened scar that Nora had strengthened from beneath. Morning light entered the silk and colored the workbench, Silas's hands, and Nora's face. Neither of them spoke. The Parasol was not beautiful in the manner Augusta valued. Its damage remained visible. One rib sat slightly lower than the others. The ivory tear had been replaced by plain white bone. Yet it stood. Nora reached to turn it. Silas reached at the same time. Their hands met around the shaft. He did not withdraw immediately, nor did she. Then the outer door opened. June Vale stood there, holding her mother's black umbrella. She had opened the hem and found the 7 green stitches. June had followed Nora from Front Street. She expected anger and received none. That seemed to frighten her more than punishment might have. She apologized until Silas brought a stool, and Nora told her she was welcome. The girl stared at the blue parasol. When Nora explained that the old panels had survived a fire, June touched the blackened edge with one finger. She said her mother's umbrella had a hidden pocket in the handle. Theodore had not known. June discovered it at age 8 while turning the cap. Inside, she had found a curl of yellow hair tied with thread and a tiny photograph of a baby. Her mother told her never to show her father. After Mrs. Vale died, June kept the photograph hidden. A month earlier, Theodore searched her room and took it. Since then, he had begun locking the drawer in his study where he kept papers from the old Bell River Hotel. Nora and Silas exchanged a look. Orson Vale, Theodore's father, had owned the hotel. A linen closet key might open nothing after 27 years, but the packet Cora had once tried to protect could still exist in the Vale house. Nora asked why June had told them. The girl lowered her eyes. She had heard Theodore and Augusta talking after the luncheon. Theodore said the Parasol must be destroyed before Nora found the place behind the green room. Augusta had answered that the old wing no longer stood. June knew of a green room in the summer house behind the Vale residence. It was not painted green. Her father called it that because the walls had been built from salvaged panels after the hotel was demolished. He kept the door locked. Silas turned the little iron key over in the tray. Nora felt the pull of a conclusion before reason had earned it. She would not ask June to steal from her father. She said so firmly. June began to cry, not loudly. Tears simply filled her eyes and moved down her cheeks while she sat very straight. She said everyone told her what she must not do, but no one ever asked what had already been done to her. Theodore had dismissed her mother's maid, burned her dresses, and forbidden June to speak of her. He called grief disobedience. If Nora married him, he would be kind until the wedding, just as he had been kind to June's mother while other people were watching. The words were too old for a 12-year-old. Nora knelt before her. She asked what June wanted. The girl said she wanted her mother's photograph back. She wanted Nora not to marry Theodore. And she wanted someone to believe her before she had to become a dead woman for the town to call her delicate. Silas walked to the window, giving Nora and June the privacy of his turned back. Nora promised the second thing immediately. She promised the first if it could be done without putting June in danger. As for belief, she took the girl's ink-stained hand and said, "I believe you now." It was the first direct promise Nora had made without imagining her mother's reply. June wiped her face. Then she asked Silas whether he would carve a wren into her umbrella handle. He said he would teach her to carve one herself. That morning, the three of them bent over a piece of scrap maple. Silas guided the knife, while June cut the first uncertain line. Nora watched the child's concentration and understood why Theodore wanted a wife chosen for patience. He did not want a mother for June. He wanted another adult to help keep the girl quiet. When June left for school, the little bird had one wing too large and a crooked beak. Silas called it excellent. Nora looked at the burned blue parasol standing open above them. She had brought it to his shop, believing the past waited inside it. Now she saw that the object had also opened a door into the future, and a child was standing there, asking whether Nora had courage enough to enter. Nora ended the engagement that afternoon. She did not wait for Theodore to call. She went to the bank at closing time, when tellers were balancing their drawers, and respectable men were least prepared for a woman to refuse them. Theodore received her in an office with frosted glass, and a portrait of his father above the desk. Orson Vale had been painted in middle age, one hand resting on a column, as if banks, hotels, and moral judgment were all natural extensions of his body. Nora placed the unused reception proof before Theodore. She said there would be no wedding. He did not ask why. His eyes went at once to the faint blue thread caught in the cuff of her glove. He locked the office door, not to threaten her physically, but to contain the scene. Then he explained what refusal would cost. The Whitcomb note came due on the 1st of June. Without renewal, the building would be sold. Augusta had no savings sufficient to satisfy it. Nora's repair work would not support 2 women in rented rooms. At 34, with the public broken engagement behind her, Nora would receive no second offer from a man of position. He spoke of her future as a road he could close by turning a key. Nora said he had mistaken fear for affection. Theodore replied that affection was unreliable. His first wife had been full of it, and it had made her secretive, extravagant, and weak. He had provided order. She had repaid him by teaching June to hide things. Nora asked about the baby's photograph. For the first time, Theodore lost command of his face. He wanted to know what June had said. Nora told him only that his daughter deserved to remember her mother without permission. Theodore rose. He said June was a suggestible child, and Nora had endangered her by encouraging fantasy. He also said Silas Doran had used women's pity before, just as his mother had. Nora looked past him at Orson Vale's portrait. She asked whether the green room behind his house contained the hotel papers. Theodore's anger became still. He unlocked the door and opened it. The interview was over. At home, Augusta received the news before Nora could give it. Theodore's carriage had overtaken her on Putnam Street. Her mother stood in the parlor beside a half-packed trunk, Nora's trunk. Augusta said there was one path back to decency. Nora would apologize to Theodore, destroy the parasol, and stop visiting Hama. If she refused, she could leave the house that night. Nora looked at the dresses folded with angry care, the Bible from her bedside, her work apron laid on top. Augusta had packed the life of her only daughter into one trunk in less than an hour. She had expected tears. Perhaps she needed them. Tears would prove that the threat still reached the center of Nora. Nora felt grief, but it was not the obedient grief her mother recognized. It had been accumulating for years. Every wage entered under Augusta's name. Every invitation declined. Every wish dismissed as ingratitude. The trunk did not begin her exile. It merely gave the exile handles. Nora asked whether Augusta had ever intended to let her live as an adult. Her mother said adults paid their debts. Nora answered that children did not create the debts used to bind them. Augusta's hand rose. This time, Nora caught her wrist. They stared at one another. Nora did not squeeze, she simply prevented the blow. Augusta's face crumpled for a fraction of a second. Then pride restored it. She pulled free and said Nora had become common. Nora took the trunk. She also took her repair tools, 3 changes of clothing, $28 she had saved in a tea tin, and the blue parasol. Everything else remained in the rooms where she had lived for 34 years. No carriage driver would take the trunk to Harmar after hearing the address. Nora dragged it as far as the bridge before a delivery boy from the bakery recognized her and fetched Silas. He arrived with his wagon, but no questions. That mercy nearly undid her.
Nora sat beside him with the trunk at their feet and the parasol closed across her lap. Whitcomb's striped awning receded behind them. Augusta stood at the upstairs window, a dark figure framed by lace curtains. Nora waited for her mother to move. She did not. Silas drove on. Mrs. Marta Klein rented Nora a room above the bakery. It was small and hot, with wallpaper patterned in faded pairs. The bed leaned toward the window. The washstand had only one sound leg and was steadied by a German hymnal. Yet from the window, Nora could see Silas's shop roof, the iron bridge, and a bright section of river. Marta asked no questions about scandal. She asked whether Nora preferred rye bread or white at breakfast, and whether she snored. When Nora said she did not know, Marta laughed so heartily that flour lifted from her apron.
The next morning, Nora woke before dawn, disoriented by the sound of bakers shaping dough below. For years, she had risen to Augusta's footsteps. Their absence felt less like freedom than a missing stare. She dressed and went to Silas's shop. He had placed the restored parasol on wall pegs where the light could reach it. Nora said she needed work. Silas offered money to help her. She refused so sharply that he understood the offer had touched a wound. He then did something Theodore never would have done. He asked what arrangement she considered fair. By noon, they had made one. Nora would use the front corner of his workshop for umbrella and parasol repairs. She would pay 1/4 of her receipts toward rent and fuel. Silas would charge separately for wood or metal work. Neither would accept a job for the other without permission. Marta's oldest son painted a sign, Nora Whitcomb. Umbrellas and parasols restored. Silas hung it beside his door. For 3 days, no one came. Front Street women would not cross the bridge to patronize a daughter who had defied Augusta. Harmar women doubted Nora's fine gloves and careful speech. Children read the sign aloud, then ran away laughing when Nora looked up. On the 4th day, June arrived with 6 broken school umbrellas tied in a bundle. She had collected them from girls whose families could not afford repairs. June said the owners would pay in pennies, eggs, or kindling. Nora accepted every one. By the end of the week, the shop smelled of wet cotton, glue, shavings, and hope. Work came in small forms. A Polish laborer brought a sunshade his wife had carried from Krakow, its fringe missing and handle split. A washerwoman asked Nora to repair the umbrella beneath which all 4 of her children walked to Mass. A river pilot wanted new silk on a parasol that had belonged to his mother, though he blushed while explaining it. People sat while Nora worked. They talked. They told her which mill supervisor docked women for visiting the privy, which grocer extended credit without announcing it, which church pews leaked during rain. They also told her stories of Augusta. Some were kind. During the flood of 1884, Augusta had fed 3 families above the shop. She had sat through nights with dying neighbors. She had arranged credit for widows too proud to ask. Other stories were harder. Augusta had dismissed a pregnant clerk without reference. She had refused to sell mourning ribbon on credit to Maeve Doran after the fire. She had stood outside church while women debated whether Maeve should be permitted inside, and had never said Maeve saved her daughter.
Nora learned that a person could be generous where generosity increased her authority, and cruel where mercy required confession. Silas listened, but did not encourage judgment. He said Augusta had been 27 when the fire occurred, younger than Nora was now. Fear did not excuse what followed, but age mattered when measuring the first cowardice. What mattered more was the number of times she renewed it. His fairness toward Augusta unsettled Nora. It also deepened her trust in him. They worked side by side through April. Silas showed June how to sharpen a carving knife. Nora taught her to replace a tip cup. Marta sent coffee and poppy seed rolls. At dusk, when customers left, Nora sometimes opened the blue parasol. Its color softened the workshop. Silas never spoke of courtship. He walked Nora to the bakery stairs but did not enter her room. Their restraint was not coldness. It was care with its hands open. One evening, after a day of steady rain, Nora found a small wooden wren on her work table. It was no larger than her thumb. One wing lifted. The beak was slightly crooked, copied from June's first carving. Nora asked whether it was for her. Silas said he had made it for the empty place on her windowsill, if she wanted it. There was no hidden message, no demand, and no promise of rescue. It was only evidence that he had noticed an empty place. Nora carried it upstairs as carefully as if it could fly away. Theodore did not wait until June to call the note. On May 2nd, a notice appeared in the Marietta Register announcing the bank's intention to sell the Whitcomb building at auction. The same column reported that Nora Whitcomb had abandoned her widowed mother after falling under the influence of Silas Doran, son of the woman implicated in the notorious Bell River Hotel fire. No reporter came to ask Nora for her account. By noon, boys had chalked "Thief's Son" on Silas's door. He washed it off before June arrived. Nora went to Augusta. The shop's front shades were lowered. Inside, shelves stood half empty because suppliers had shortened credit. Augusta was at the rear table, trying to replace a parasol spring with Nora's second-best pliers. She had fitted it backward. For years, Nora had imagined that if her mother ever needed her, the need would produce tenderness. Instead, it produced fury. Augusta demanded the return of the repair tools. She said they belonged to Whitcombs. Nora opened the cash book and showed where her wages had purchased them. Her mother swept the book onto the floor. She accused Nora of bringing the auction through stubbornness. Theodore would withdraw the notice if she reconsidered. Nora asked whether Augusta had given the newspaper its story about Silas. Augusta did not deny it. She said one ruined name should not be allowed to pull another down. Nora replied that names did not ruin themselves. People made choices, then hid behind names. The shop bell rang. Cora Bell entered. She was small and very old, wearing the same grey bonnet the hotel boy had described. A polished hickory stick supported her left side. One eye was clouded, but the other moved between Augusta and Nora with unweakened intelligence. Augusta sat down. Cora said she had come because the newspaper proved nothing had changed. Her voice was rough, and Nora had to lean close to hear. She explained that she had sent the parasol after learning of Nora's intended engagement to Orson Vale's son. She had not expected Nora to repair it. She had expected Augusta to destroy it. That was why the key had been hidden. The parasol was a test. Augusta called it blackmail. Cora laughed once. She said blackmail required a demand, and she had asked for nothing in 27 years. Nora brought a chair, but Cora refused to sit until Augusta answered one question. Did Nora know who carried her from the hotel? Nora said she knew now. Cora nodded. Something inside her seemed to settle. Then she told them what happened after Maeve returned through the smoke.
Cora had been carrying wet laundry toward the upper floor when she saw Harlan Whitcomb leave Orson Vale's private sitting room. His coat pocket bulged. Behind him, flames climbed a velvet curtain. Harlan passed Cora without warning anyone. He ran downstairs. Maeve was in the dining room. When Cora shouted about the fire, Maeve went first to the guest room where Nora was sleeping. Cora went for a water bucket. Smoke blocked her return. She used a service stair and reached the yard as Maeve emerged with Nora beneath the blue parasol. Later, while hotel employees searched the ruins, Cora found the packet of money behind a loose green wall panel in the service passage. It had not burned. Orson Vale took it from her and ordered her silence. He said a colored laundress accusing two white businessmen would only send herself to jail. The brooch remained missing. At the inquiry, Cora tried to testify. Orson's lawyer said she was confused and had been dismissed for dishonesty. Harlan stated that Maeve had access to Augusta's room. Augusta sat beside him. Cora looked at her now. Augusta whispered that Harlan was ill. Cora said he had lived 19 more years. Augusta said Nora had needed a father. Cora answered that Silas had needed a mother who could buy bread without being called a thief. No one spoke for a long time. The traffic of Front Street moved beyond the lowered shades. Somewhere a wagon wheel struck a stone. Nora heard each ordinary sound with painful clarity. She asked about the key. Cora said it opened the service panel in the green passage. When the Bell River Hotel's damaged wing was dismantled, Orson Vale had its oak panels moved to his house. He built them into a summer house behind the garden. Cora believed the packet was no longer there, but something else might be. On the morning after the fire, Maeve had found Augusta's blue parasol discarded in the yard. Before her arrest, she told Cora she had seen Harlan push a small object into the hollow shaft while men questioned hotel workers. Maeve could not remove the handle without tools. She sealed Cora's service key into the torn seam and asked her to keep the parasol until someone from the Whitcomb family was willing to open both it and the truth. Cora kept it. She admitted that for many years she did so from anger, not hope. Then age made revenge feel heavy. When she heard Augusta intended to join Nora to the Vale family, she sent the parcel. Nora removed the restored parasol from its wrapper. Cora touched the 7 green stitches. Her hand shook. She said Maeve's burns never healed properly. For months, Cora changed the bandages. Maeve had asked only once about Nora. She wanted to know whether the child still remembered the Wren song. Nora felt the room tilt. The word had not come from smoke or shock. Maeve had held her beneath burning silk and sung about a little brown bird flying home. Augusta covered her face. It was the first time Nora had seen her mother weep without controlling the sound. Yet confession did not follow. When Cora asked Augusta to clear Maeve's name publicly, Augusta lowered her hands and said the witnesses were dead, the story uncertain, and the family already facing ruin. A statement now would destroy the last value attached to Whitcombs. Cora looked not surprised but tired. She told Nora that this was what repeated cowardice sounded like. It always called itself necessity. Then she left the shop. Nora followed and asked where she could find her again. Cora gave the address of her nephew's house in Parkersburg. She said Silas could visit if he wished, but he owed her no gratitude. She should have given Maeve the parasol years earlier. Fear had lived in more than one household. Before stepping into the street, Cora pressed Nora's hand. She said repair was honorable work, but some things had to be opened before they could be mended. Silas visited Cora the next day. He went alone. Nora understood. When he returned after dark, he carried a cloth bundle containing Maeve's thimble.
2 cabinet photographs, and a child's wooden horse Amos had made for him. Cora had kept them after Maeve's last illness because Silas was traveling. He set the objects on his bench one at a time. In the first photograph, Maeve stood beside Amos's umbrella shop.
She was narrow-faced, with dark hair and capable hands. Silas, at about 6, leaned against her skirt. The Wren sign hung above the door. In the second, Maeve was older. Bandage gloves covered both hands. Her expression was neither broken nor saintly. It was impatient, as if the photographer had delayed her from work. Silas said he had spent years remembering only how the town described her. Thief, servant, burned woman, burden. He had forgotten she disliked photographs and made excellent apple dumplings. Nora did not tell him grief would pass. She sat beside him until Marta's bakery ovens began their midnight firing. Silas spoke of visiting Maeve in the Pittsburgh infirmary. By then he was apprenticed and proud of paying his own board. He had begged her to tell him what happened in Marietta. She refused, saying she would not build his life around revenge. He mistook silence for shame. Now he understood that she had tried, however imperfectly, to keep him from inheriting the fire. Nora thought of Augusta doing the opposite. Her mother had built their entire household around preserving one night's lie. Silas asked whether Nora regretted opening the Parasol. She said she regretted only the years it had remained closed. He touched her cheek with the back of 2 fingers, giving her time to turn away. She did not. Their first kiss was quiet. It carried no astonishment, only recognition. Nora had expected desire to feel like being seized by a life larger than her own. Instead, it felt like being left fully inside herself while another person came near. When they separated, Silas rested his forehead against hers. He said he would not ask her to choose between him and Augusta. Nora answered that Augusta had made that choice herself.
Cora had been carrying wet laundry toward the upper floor when she saw Harlan Whitcomb leave Orson Vale's private sitting room. His coat pocket bulged. Behind him, flames climbed a velvet curtain. Harlan passed Cora without warning anyone. He ran downstairs. Maeve was in the dining room. When Cora shouted about the fire, Maeve went first to the guest room where Nora was sleeping. Cora went for a water bucket. Smoke blocked her return. She used a service stair and reached the yard as Maeve emerged with Nora beneath the blue parasol. Later, while hotel employees searched the ruins, Cora found the packet of money behind a loose green wall panel in the service passage. It had not burned. Orson Vale took it from her and ordered her silence. He said a colored laundress accusing 2 white businessmen would only send herself to jail. The brooch remained missing. Within the handkerchief lay an emerald brooch. The stone was dark with grime, but when Cora wiped it against her sleeve, green light appeared. 12 seed pearls surrounded the emerald. The clasp was bent, and a strand of blue silk remained caught in it. The missing brooch had never been in Maeve Doran's possession. Harlan Whitcomb had hidden it inside his wife's parasol, while Maeve, burned and bleeding, was being accused of taking it. Cora sat down at last. Silas did not touch the brooch. He stared at Harlan's initials until Nora feared the silence would harden around him. Then he asked why. Cora could offer only what she had seen. Harlan had emerged from Orson Vale's room with his pocket full. Orson had hidden hotel money before the inquiry. Perhaps Harlan intended to pawn Augusta's brooch. Perhaps Orson paid him to accept blame if the money was found. Perhaps the fire began during their quarrel. Dead men had taken those answers with them. But the central truth required no guess. Maeve had been accused of stealing a brooch that Harlan concealed. Nora carried it to her mother. Augusta was alone in the darkened shop. The auction notice hung crookedly inside the window. Half the ribbon shelves were bare, and the fine imported buttons had disappeared from their glass case. She had sold them to pay a supplier. Nora placed the handkerchief on the counter and opened it. Her mother did not reach for the brooch. She recognized the initials first. Augusta said she had embroidered 6 handkerchiefs for Harlan during the winter of their engagement. She had made the center of each W with 3 threads instead of 2, because he said thin letters looked poor. Her finger moved above the stained cloth without touching it. Then she looked at the emerald. For 27 years, Augusta had told herself Maeve took it. Even after no brooch was found, even after Harlan's debts surfaced, even after he woke from fever calling Orson Vale's name, Augusta had kept the accusation alive, because the alternative required her to look at the man she had chosen. She admitted that Harlan confessed part of the truth before his death. He said he and Orson had removed cash from the hotel to cover an investment loss. Harlan brought the brooch as temporary security. They argued. A lamp fell. Harlan fled when the curtain caught fire. Orson later recovered the money and forced Harlan to support the story against Maeve. Augusta had known for 11 years. Nora felt the confession like a second fire. She had expected ignorance, cowardice in youth, or a wife's desperate confusion. Instead, Augusta had learned the truth while Maeve was still alive in Pittsburgh. She could have written. She could have spoken to the minister, the constable, the newspaper. She could have restored work to burned hands. She had done nothing. Augusta said Harlan was dying when he confessed. Exposing him would have stripped Nora of respectability and left the store without credit. Maeve had already gone. Nothing could undo the past. Nora closed the handkerchief around the brooch. She asked how many times her mother had said that exact thing to herself. Augusta began to answer, but Nora stopped her. For once, explanation was not the same as truth. The bank auction would take place in 9 days. Theodore had arranged for the building to be sold from its own front steps.
Nora told Augusta that Cora was willing to make a sworn statement, and that the brooch would be shown to the former constable. Augusta said Theodore would call it a forgery. Nora replied that he might. The town could choose another lie, but Augusta would not be permitted to pretend she had no choice. Nora asked her mother to stand beside Cora and speak. Augusta looked around the emptying shop. Every box and ribbon reel seemed to ask the price of honesty. She said she could not. Nora took the brooch and left. On the bridge, grief overtook anger. She stopped at the railing, unable to breathe evenly. Silas found her there. He did not ask what Augusta had chosen. He could see it. Nora said she had spent her life believing there was a hidden door inside her mother. If she behaved well enough, worked long enough, and needed little enough, the door would open and affection would be waiting. Now she feared the room behind it was empty. Silas said he did not believe that. He had seen Augusta weep at Maeve's name. Something lived behind the door. But love kept locked away could starve the people outside as surely as no love at all. Nora leaned against him while the river moved beneath them. She did not forgive Augusta that day. She stopped waiting for forgiveness to be required before she could continue living. Theodore removed June from school. He told the headmistress she was ill, but June's friend brought Nora a different account. Theodore had discovered the carved Wren on the girl's umbrella. He accused June of meeting Silas and locked her in the Vale house. A trunk from Cincinnati arrived the next morning. The rumor was that June would be sent to a convent school, despite being Episcopalian. Nora went to the Vale residence. Theodore received her on the porch and would not let her enter. He said June's discipline was a family matter. Nora had surrendered any possible relation to the girl when she refused marriage. Nora asked to hear June say she was well. Theodore closed the door. The law gave Nora no claim. Concern was not kinship. A father's authority entered places where a neighbor's compassion could not follow. She went to Mrs. Ruth Bellamy, the older sister of June's mother. Ruth lived outside town on a farm and had not visited the Vale house since her sister's funeral. Theodore had told June that her aunt blamed the girl for the pneumonia that killed her mother. Ruth's face changed when she heard this. The estrangement had begun because Ruth accused Theodore of cruelty during his wife's illness. He barred her from the house and returned every letter she sent June. Ruth had assumed the child rejected her. By evening, Ruth Bellamy was at the Vale door with a hired man, the family doctor, and enough anger to be mistaken for legal authority. Theodore allowed her inside. June did not leave that day, but the trunk for Cincinnati remained unopened. Ruth stayed in the house as a guest and sent word to Nora that June was safe. It was not rescue. It was a witness. Nora understood the difference and valued it. On Sunday, the Improvement League held its annual spring meeting at St. Luke's Parish Hall. Augusta had served as treasurer for 16 years. Theodore was scheduled to speak about civic order after recent labor disturbances. Nora did not intend to attend. Then the Register printed a second article. It stated that Silas Doran had manufactured false evidence to extort money from two respected families. It described Cora Bell as an aged former servant whose recollections had been encouraged by Nora. It suggested that Nora's recent behavior arose from feminine distress following Theodore's postponed engagement. The article did not name June, but it praised Theodore's devotion as a father. Silas read it once and folded the paper. He said public defense would feed the story. Cora disagreed. She had spent 27 years watching silence fed until it grew fat enough to pass for history. Nora looked at the blue parasol, the green brooch, and Harlan's stained handkerchief. Then she put on her plain brown dress and walked to St. Luke's. Silas and Cora went with her. The parish hall was full. Women filled the front rows in spring hats. Bank directors and vestrymen stood along the walls. Theodore had brought copies of the newspaper and arranged them beside the lemonade. Augusta sat on the platform beneath the League banner, her face pale above her black collar. Conversation stopped when Nora entered. Silas carried the restored parasol closed at his side. Cora leaned on his arm. The sight of a white craftsman escorting an elderly black midwife through the center aisle disturbed the room more than the newspaper's accusations had. People turned to one another, seeking permission for what to feel. Theodore stepped down from the platform. He said the meeting was private. Cora replied that her disgrace had been public. Her voice did not carry to the back, so Nora repeated the words. Theodore ordered the sexton to remove them. The sexton, whose wife had been delivered by Cora during a winter storm, studied the floor and did not move. Nora asked for 5 minutes. Theodore laughed gently, inviting the room to share his pity. He said Miss Whitcomb had suffered strain and should be protected from further display. Silas Doran, he added, had preyed upon a vulnerable unmarried woman for revenge. There it was, Nora's entire life reduced to vulnerability because she had finally used her own judgment. She felt the old instinct to look at Augusta. She resisted it. Nora told the room that Theodore had announced an engagement without her consent and tied the renewal of her mother's loan to marriage. He had used a child's need for care as another argument for control. Whatever anyone believed about the fire, they should understand the character of the man asking them to dismiss it. Orson Vale and Harlan Whitcomb had lied. Augusta had helped them by remaining silent, first from fear, later from pride, and finally from habit. She had allowed a burned woman to carry disgrace so that Augusta could carry a respected name. Theodore accused her of confusion. Augusta turned toward the women who had known her for decades. She said she was not confused. She was late. That distinction broke something in the room. Mrs. Enderley began to cry. The sexton opened the doors. One of the bank directors removed the newspapers from the lemonade table. Others still avoided Silas's eyes. A confession could correct a public record more quickly than it could reform private hearts. Ruth took June outside. Theodore followed, but two vestrymen stopped him. They did not suddenly become brave. They had simply recognized that association with him was now more dangerous than opposition. Theodore called Cora a liar. Silas did not strike him. The effort it cost was visible in his hands. Theodore then called the brooch a cheap imitation. He said Silas could have purchased a green stone anywhere, and Nora could have embroidered the initials. Augusta rose. The hall became completely silent. For one hopeful second, Nora believed her mother had chosen truth. Instead, Augusta said the meeting should continue. She declared the evidence inconclusive and asked everyone to remember the harm reckless accusations could do to surviving families. Cora closed her eye. Silas lowered the parasol. Nora had thought herself prepared. She was not. A child's need opened inside her, the ancient wish that when the final moment came, her mother would choose her. Augusta had chosen the locked door again. Theodore offered his arm to guide Nora out. She stepped away from him. Then June's voice came from the back of the hall. She said her father had lied too. Ruth Bellamy stood beside her. June clutched her mother's black umbrella in one hand and a small silver collar in the other. The collar bore the initials A.W. June had found it that morning, behind the loose screen panel in the Vale summer house. Cora's iron key opened the old service latch exactly. Behind the panel were several objects salvaged from the hotel. The collar, a smoke-blackened hotel bell, and a tin dispatch box. The box was empty. Theodore had burned its contents after the parasol arrived. Ruth had seen the ashes in the garden stove. The collar fit the pale ring on the parasol handle. Theodore crossed the hall and seized June by the shoulder. The girl cried out. Nora moved before thought. So did Ruth. So did Augusta. Augusta reached them first. She struck Theodore's hand away from June. It was the same controlled motion with which she had struck Nora, but this time power moved in another direction. Augusta placed herself between Theodore and the child. Her body seemed suddenly old. Her voice did not. She said the emerald was genuine. Harlan had given it to her on their 10th anniversary. She had embroidered the handkerchief. Maeve Doran had saved Nora. Harlan had confessed his part in the theft and fire before he died. Then Augusta said the sentence that should have been spoken 27 years earlier. Maeve Doran was innocent. Silas bowed his head. No applause followed. Truth did not enter the room like victory. It entered like weather after a roof had been removed. People shifted beneath it, exposed. Augusta continued. She said Cora Bell had told the truth at the inquiry. Orson Vale and Harlan Whitcomb had lied. Augusta had helped them by remaining silent, first from fear, later from pride, and finally from habit. She had allowed a burned woman to carry disgrace so that Augusta could carry a respected name. Theodore accused her of confusion. Augusta turned toward the women who had known her for decades. She said she was not confused. She was late. That distinction broke something in the room. Mrs. Enderley began to cry. The sexton opened the doors. One of the bank directors removed the newspapers from the lemonade table. Others still avoided Silas's eyes. A confession could correct a public record more quickly than it could reform private hearts. Ruth took June outside. Theodore followed, but two vestrymen stopped him. They did not suddenly become brave. They had simply recognized that association with him was now more dangerous than opposition.
Nora remained in the aisle. Augusta looked at her. There was no request for forgiveness in her face. Perhaps she finally understood that asking would make Nora responsible for easing the pain of confession. She stepped down from the platform and approached Silas. Augusta said his mother's name again. Then she bowed to him. Silas did not tell her it was enough. He said his mother had deserved the truth while she was alive. Augusta answered that she knew. It was the only honest reply available. The confession did not save Whitcomb's fine notions. The bank directors postponed the auction for 30 days and asked Theodore to take a leave of absence. But Harlan's old debt remained. Augusta could not pay it with remorse. Nora did not ask Silas to risk his shop, and she refused a collection proposed by the Improvement League. Too many of the same women had watched Maeve's family leave town. Augusta sold the remaining stock. On the last day, Nora entered the shop before dawn. She found her mother wrapping ribbon reels in newspaper for a buyer from Athens. They worked together without discussing whether Nora had been invited. Nora packed buttons and hooks. Augusta sorted invoices. Dust marked the empty places on shelves. By noon, only the rear repair table remained. The auctioneer had listed it with the fixtures. Augusta removed the paper label and handed it to Nora. She said the table had been purchased with Nora's labor and belonged to her. It was not an apology. It was restitution small enough to be carried through a door. Silas and Marta's sons moved the table to Hamar. Augusta rented 2 rooms above a dressmaker's shop. She could have lived with Nora if Nora surrendered the room above the bakery and returned to being a daughter under command. Nora did not offer that. Instead, she visited every Thursday. At first, Augusta used the visits to give instructions. Nora ignored them. Then her mother used them to recount complaints about the dressmaker's noise. Nora listened for 20 minutes and left at the agreed hour. Boundaries seemed cruel to Augusta because she had never lived beside one she did not control. Gradually, the visits changed. One Thursday, Nora brought Maeve's photograph. Augusta looked at it for a long time. She remembered the apple dumplings, too. Maeve had brought them to the Whitcomb house after Nora's birth. Augusta had eaten 2 while pretending she wanted none. The memory did not absolve her. It returned Maeve from symbol to woman. Augusta wrote a statement for the register. She hired a young widow named Elsie Novak, who could match silk by touch in poor light. June helped after school and was paid for every hour, despite Ruth's claim that family friends did not need to pay. Nora insisted. She had learned what unpaid devotion could become in the hands of people who called it duty. Silas expanded into the adjoining shed. He and Nora placed a door between the workspaces, but never removed the wall entirely. Each had a room, a trade, and a key. In June of 1905, he asked Nora to marry him. He did not ask beside the river or beneath the blue parasol. He asked while they were discussing the price of stove coal. Silas said he loved her, wanted a household with her, and did not expect marriage to combine their earnings or authority unless she chose it. He had already spoken with a lawyer about a contract preserving her business property. The law favored fathers, but witnesses from the Vale house described confinement, threats, and the destruction of Mrs. Vale's belongings. Theodore's public seizure of June in the parish hall did not help him. The case lasted through autumn. June lived with Ruth while it proceeded.
She came to the workshop every Saturday and carved birds with increasingly proportionate wings. Her mother's photograph returned to its pocket inside the black umbrella handle. When the court finally allowed June to remain with Ruth, the decision cited Theodore's relocation and the girl's health. It did not use the word cruelty. June did not require the word from a judge. She had witnesses now. By the following spring, the corner in Silas's workshop was too small. Nora's repairs arrived from both sides of the river. Women who had once avoided Harmar came quietly at first, then openly. She hired a young widow named Elsie Novak, who could match silk by touch in poor light. June helped after school and was paid for every hour, despite Ruth's claim that family friends did not need to pay. Nora insisted. She had learned what unpaid devotion could become in the hands of people who called it duty. Silas expanded into the adjoining shed. He and Nora placed a door between the workspaces, but never removed the wall entirely. Each had a room, a trade, and a key. In June of 1905, he asked Nora to marry him. He did not ask beside the river or beneath the blue parasol. He asked while they were discussing the price of stove coal. Silas said he loved her, wanted a household with her, and did not expect marriage to combine their earnings or authority unless she chose it. He had already spoken with a lawyer about a contract preserving her business property. The practicality moved Nora more deeply than Spectacle could have. She said yes. They married in Cora's church in Parkersburg because St. Luke's had once closed its social doors to Maeve. Ruth and June stood with Nora. Marta brought enough cake for twice the invited guests. Augusta came alone in a grey dress. She sat in the second pew. No one had assigned her there. The first pew remained open, but Augusta understood that old rank could not be resumed simply because she had confessed. After the service, she approached Silas. She offered him the emerald brooch. He declined it. Nora declined it too. They agreed the stone should be sold. The money paid for a small lending shelf at the workshop, where factory women could borrow umbrellas during storms and return them without charge. A brass plate carried no Whitcomb or Vale name. It read, "For anyone caught in the rain." Augusta did not object to the missing name. That was one of the ways Nora knew her mother had begun to change. Change did not make Augusta gentle. She still criticized Nora's bread, Silas's collars, June's posture, and Marta's loud laugh. She still believed a good hat could correct moral decline. When illness stiffened her hands, she became angry at buttons. But she stopped using sacrifice as a debt. In the winter of 1907, Augusta suffered a mild stroke. Nora arranged for a practical nurse and visited daily for 6 weeks. She did not close her shop. She did not move into Augusta's rooms. When her mother protested, Nora reminded her that care freely given remained care. One snowy afternoon, Augusta asked to see the blue parasol. Nora brought it. Time had faded the new silk until it nearly matched the old. The blackened scar still crossed one panel. 7 green stitches remained beneath it. Augusta asked Nora to open it. Blue light spread across the little room. For a while, Augusta said nothing. Then she remembered more of the fire. Maeve had not only sung to Nora, she had shouted at Augusta to wet the parasol before climbing the stairs. Augusta had frozen in the hotel yard. Maeve had snatched it from her hand and run inside. For years, Augusta resented Maeve for acting while she stood still. That resentment had made the later lie easier. Nora listened. Augusta said she did love her daughter. She had loved her so fearfully that she tried to remove every uncertain road, every unsuitable person, every choice that might carry pain. Eventually, she had removed Nora herself and called the empty place safety. The words came without a request.
Nora took her mother's weakened hand.
She said love could explain a prison without turning it into a home. Augusta nodded. Nora did not say she forgave everything. Some injuries should not be hurried into a beautiful ending, merely to comfort the person who caused them. She said she was willing to know her mother as she was now. For Augusta, who had spent a lifetime governing the meaning of the past, the present was a humbling place to begin. It was also the only place left. Cora Bell died in 1908 at 81. The church overflowed with adults she had delivered and mothers she had kept alive. Nora was astonished by the number of people who carried some private memory of Cora entering a room at the worst hour and bringing order without asking permission from fear. Silas placed Maeve's thimble beside Cora's hand before the coffin closed. He said one woman had kept the other's truth when no court wanted it. Afterward, June asked whether that meant the thimble was gone forever. Silas said objects were not the only way to remember. Nora looked at the girl, now 16, tall and direct. June had decided to train as a nurse. Theodore had written twice from Columbus, demanding her return. She answered once, saying any future relationship would require him to acknowledge what he had done. He sent no reply. June grieved the father she wished she had. She did not go back to the one who required silence. That distinction became another inheritance. By 1912, motor cars sometimes splashed mud onto the workshop windows. Ready-made umbrellas arrived from factories at prices Nora could not match. People said the repair trade would vanish. Nora did not believe them. As long as objects carried memory, someone would hesitate before throwing them away. She and Silas moved the business to a larger building near the bridge. The front room held umbrellas, carved handles, canes, and a work table polished by years of hands. Elsie Novak became a partner. June, before leaving for nursing school, painted a new sign with a wren at each end. Augusta attended the opening. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane Silas had made. He had carved no bird on it. Not every object required a symbol, and not every relationship needed to pretend it had become something else. Still, he had shaped the handle exactly to her hand. Augusta noticed. She thanked him. He accepted the thanks. Near the door stood the lending shelf, funded by the Emerald. Its umbrellas never matched. Some were patched, some faded, some too large for children. They left in storms and returned days or weeks later. One disappeared for nearly a year, then came back with a new brass tip and no explanation. Nora did not keep count. She had once spent her life measuring worth through what was owed. Years given to the store, obedience given to her mother, security offered by Theodore, gratitude demanded in return. The lending shelf taught another arithmetic. A useful thing could pass through unknown hands without becoming a chain. The burned blue parasol hung open above Nora's repair table. Visitors often asked whether it was for sale. Nora always said no. Sometimes she told its history. She did not describe Maeve only as the woman who saved a child. She told people that Maeve repaired umbrellas, sewed 7 green stitches, disliked photographs, and made excellent apple dumplings. Silas always added that she laughed when a parrot bit his father. The ordinary details mattered. They returned to Maeve the life that disgrace had reduced to one accusation, and later praise might have reduced to one heroic act. On a rainy afternoon in March, a young mill worker entered carrying a parasol crushed beneath a wagon wheel. The girl's face showed that she expected refusal. The silk was torn, the shaft split, and 3 ribs were missing. She said it was the last thing her mother had brought from Hungary. Nora examined it. The damage was severe. Repair would take days. A new parasol would cost less. The girl waited.
Nora remembered standing in Silas's workshop, with burned silk across her hands. She remembered his first refusal, her journey to Parkersburg, the small carved bird placed near an empty window. She remembered Augusta in the parish hall saying she was late. Then Nora told the girl the truth. It would never look untouched. It could still be made strong enough to open. The girl smiled. Nora carried the parasol to her table. Outside, rain darkened the bridge and made the Ohio disappear into the sky. Silas worked in the next room. Augusta sat near the stove, older and quieter, sorting wooden tips into boxes because her hands still needed a task. No one commanded the others. No one was present because a debt required it. Nora opened the burned blue parasol to catch the window light. Old silk and new silk glowed together. The scar remained visible. So did the stitches. For most of her life, Nora had believed a person was saved when someone stronger chose the road for her. She knew better now. Maeve had carried her out of one fire. Cora had protected the truth. Silas had made room without asking her to become smaller. June had spoken while afraid.
Augusta, late but not too late to matter, had finally named what she had done. Yet the life Nora lived had not been handed to her by any one of them. It began on the day she carried a ruined thing through the rain and refused to burn it. She threaded her needle with green silk. Then she made the first of 7 stitches.